This is just one street in Toledo where young girls are bought and sold every single day. But it's also a place where members of our community are rallying behind victims of sex trafficking. 7 years ago, Michelle Moore, a victim of sex trafficking, walked this North Toledo street looking for men who would pay her for sex.
There were a lot of nights walking down the street knowing I couldn't go back until I had made what I had to make.
Moore has the physical scars, 2 glaring gashes across her neck from a man who stabbed her.
He attacked me, and he tried to rape, rob, and murder me.
And the emotional scars.
You just get to that point where my self-esteem was just so low.
Moore describes the traffickers in our community as evil and deceitfully charismatic, using drugs and alcohol to keep young girls under their control, ready to trade them for quick cash.
Once they get you under their control, then the gloves come off. They're very charismatic, you know, until they get what they want, until they get you in that position where there's no turning back.
No turning back for Moore. Instead, she's moving forward.
Bag of cheese. Always a good one.
Moore's a senior at the University of Toledo, studying to be a counselor, and she works for Second Chance, a community program for victims, providing food, comfort, and hope to young girls.
My job here as a survivor is so important because they can look to me and they can say, wow, we know that you were in the life. You know, we know, you know, that you've been there and you are where you are today.
Just a few miles away, under a stained glass window at that neighborhood church, Leanne Campbell tells me her childhood put her on a path that led to being trafficked. She says her stepfather started taking photos of her and selling them when she was just 6 years old.
Sex for money, it was quick and easy. You don't have a choice, there's no options. And the options aren't, you know, good and evil, it's all bad.
Campbell abused drugs and alcohol as a way to cope. Her way out came after this.
I actually threatened to go and kill my mom and my 5 kids.
That incident led to jail time and eventually recovery. Now Campbell is sober, has custody of her children, and volunteers in the community. She started a nonprofit called Rahab's Heart, aimed at helping other women.
Just, you know, walking with them, humbling ourselves to walk with them, you know, for the first time, to just start building that relationship, to show them there is another way.
While some survivors have changed their lives, this place hasn't been transformed yet, leaving serious work to be done here and throughout our community. Reporting in Toledo, Jacqueline Policastro, 13 ABC, Action News. On some nights, more than 80 sex acts are performed at a single truck stop, many of them by young children, the victims of sex trafficking. It all happens in beds like this one, in the back of a truck.
Give me a call in about an hour, okay?
Okay.
On a rainy night, under the cover of darkness, Sheriff Sam Krish and his team set out to save young girls.
I'm just looking for a good time.
They work the radio at a truck stop notorious for sex trafficking. The radio chatter is disturbing.
I got addictive personality. I go broke. I need one 3-4 times a day.
We cover our cameras in black tape, and the officers wait, texting with girls who are offering sex acts for cash. When cars pull in, officers run their plates, and they apprehend suspects when they get the chance. Before we witnessed this risky operation, we met the sheriff and his team at the Lima Police Department.
Just about everyone that we have arrested, they're employed, good jobs, married. A lot of them are married, they have families. So those are the individuals who are out there buying these young girls.
Krish says the crime is fueled by heroin and cocaine use. Sex trafficking is on the rise, and he doesn't see it going away, saying the girls he recovers are often desperate.
It's not going to just pick up a girl today and she's going to be fixed tomorrow.
That's because there's so much underlying abuse and fear. Trafficked girls can be as young as 8 years old.
You find a lot of brokenness, a lot of hurt, a lot of mistrust. They don't always want to work with me even, or law enforcement, or other social workers.
And the officers working this undercover operation understand why.
I've talked to a lot of people and they always say this is a victimless crime. The thing that I can say to that is I've interviewed thousands of girls, and none of them has ever said they even wanted to do this.
Hello?
How are you?
So as a team, they work in the dark and in the rain until the early hours of the morning, doing whatever it takes. It's rare to witness a night like this. That's because many police departments aren't willing to spend resources on such a risky undercover operation. But the officers working here tell us even if they save just one girl, it's all worth it. Reporting in Lima, Ohio, I'm Jacqueline Policastro. FBI agents tell us sex trafficking is often a family business in Toledo, and that knowledge is helping agents arrest pimps and save some young girls' lives. These criminals are connected, some of them by blood. Relatives working together to sell young girls' bodies.
Pimps, when they were arrested and we'd interview them, we'd find out by looking at their history that their dad was a pimp, or their grandfather or their uncle were pimps. The girls oftentimes, mom was a prostitute.
Tracing a family tree is part of the job for the FBI, and it's still relatively new. 8 years ago, sex trafficking wasn't even on the radar for law enforcement here in Toledo.
For so long, this went on as a normal course of business. It was a lucrative business enterprise, and nobody's really getting arrested, that these businesses just kind of flourished, and they flourished as family businesses.
Known networks, generational activity, established routes and contacts. Toledo is an origin city, ground zero for sex trafficking. Children recruited here are found in prostitution houses in major cities across the country.
Social media is becoming the breeding ground for this recruitment.
Agents say the grooming process for victims starts by a pimp acting as a boyfriend, telling a broken young girl that he loves her. The girls are very young, some only 8 years old. Agents say it's a lot like fighting organized crime, but with one very big difference.
Not just have this hard attitude about just locking up the people involved in the conduct, but separating the true victims from the pimps and those who are coercing these young girls into the sexual trade.
So what's the future of fighting this crime? FBI agents tell us it's all about awareness and education throughout our community. Reporting in Toledo, Jacqueline Policastro, 13 ABC Action News. Dr. Celia Williamson's life is dedicated to helping victims of sex trafficking, victims who have suffered through unbelievable trauma like this.
Every day you go in and sometimes you're raped and you're beaten, or sometimes your trafficker has to punish you and chain you outside on the porch naked all night in the winter because you defied him and broke the rule.
Williamson's office at the University of Toledo is decorated with diplomas, but also gracious notes of thanks from victims. An angel of hope hangs from the window, even though Williamson says we're losing the battle against sex trafficking.
The three largest illegal enterprises in the world are guns, drugs, and human trafficking. Which business do you want to be in? Guns and drugs, where we know exactly where to look, how to prosecute it, and we arrest the right people? Or do you want to be in human trafficking where you can sell your victim over and over?
Williamson spearheaded a 2012 study about domestic sex trafficking in Ohio, funded by the Department of Justice and sponsored by the Attorney General's Ohio Human Trafficking Commission. We looked through the study, and as we printed off the pages, there were more questions than answers. Like who's buying sex from children in our community?
The pervert living under the bridge doesn't have money. So who's purchasing? Men.
Victims in the study identified city employees, police officers, lawyers, social workers, politicians, priests, and accountants. So I talked to Attorney General Mike DeWine about it.
It was quite shocking when we looked at that report where many of the victims reported that the people who were purchasing sex were involved in law enforcement.
As the state's lead attorney, can you tell me why aren't we prosecuting people who are buying sex?
Historically, we have prosecuted the prostitutes, but not prosecuted the men who are buying the sex.
Back in Williamson's office, she says that's not enough, adding she thinks people who are serious about ending trafficking need to be serious about prosecuting men who buy sex.
If you end demand, you end trafficking. If you try to bite into supply all the time, there always will be supply. There always will be vulnerable people that can be trafficked.
And vulnerability is what every sex trafficking victim shares. That's why Williamson says she will continue to fight for young girls in our community. Reporting in Toledo, Jacqueline Policastro, 13 ABC, Action News. We already know sex trafficking is a serious problem in our community. So now, instead of just responding, we're working to prevent children from becoming victims. The room is packed, and it's not just with law enforcement. This is the Lucas County Human Trafficking Coalition, where sex trafficking is exposed.
We have been paying attention, we have been working on this issue, and we aren't remaining quiet on it.
Tasha Purdue is the co-chair of the group, made up of lawyers, counselors, researchers, and community activists, all dedicated to caring for victims.
We're talking about teenagers, kids that need somebody to rescue them and say, it's not okay. We're going to find you. I don't care who you are. We're going to find you and put you somewhere where you're safe.
As members stand up,
I have cards, I have information.
They explain that preventing trafficking means finding a way to better search for missing children. Runaways are at risk.
Our girls, when they run away, nobody goes looking for them.
It's a well-organized coalition. Like us, they take notes and ask questions.
I ask every single one of them, if you were to graduate from high school or go on to college, what do you want to do? And every one of them lights up and says, oh, I want to be a vet, or I want to be a teacher, I want to be a nurse. None of them say, I want to keep doing this.
In Ohio, most victims are trafficked when they're between 14 and 15 years old and are recruited at malls, juvenile centers, courthouses, and even at the homes of family and friends.
I'm always astounded at the number of professionals it takes to replace one good, solid parent. Probably 30 professionals for one good, solid parent.
There's a lot of coffee in the room, fueling up for a fight that's happening on our streets every day. A human rights violation that leaders say must be stopped.
Our society is sexualizing and objectifying girls and women, and we're turning women into a commodity.
Sex trafficking isn't just happening in poor neighborhoods or with youth already at risk. All of our children are exposed, and the fight to keep them safe continues. Reporting in Toledo, Jacqueline Policastro, 13 ABC, Action News. Bill Raccia and Bill Radcliffe spent 15 years working together as FBI agents in Toledo. But now they're in a new fight. They want to stop missing Ohio children from being lured into sex trafficking.
It's a very, very sinister lifestyle that we're trying to get them away from.
The retired special agents say their career together fighting organized crime prepared them for this.
Do you think that our community needs a wake-up call when it comes to this particular issue, sex trafficking?
We need a wake-up call, yes, in Northwest Ohio, but we need a wake-up call everywhere in the country, because it's not a problem that's going away, it's a growing problem.
The men tell us they've been working for nearly 2 years to get clearance to help search for missing children, but their efforts are bound by red tape.
As retired agents, we are retired. We no longer have any authority under any federal statute. If we go out and start knocking on doors to look for children, to develop leads in finding them, if we do so without any authority, we're in effect vigilantes.
Raccia and Radcliffe have asked for credentials and liability insurance from the Toledo Police Department, Lucas County Sheriff's Office, Toledo FBI Office, Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So far, they've been denied.
Both former agents tell me they're not looking for a second career or to get rich. They're simply trying to help young girls at risk in our community.
And the risk is great. Experts tell us when a child runs away, there's only a 2-week window to find them before they might be absorbed into trafficking. There is a child exploitation FBI task force in Northwest Ohio, but it only focuses on children who are already trafficked, not those who are missing and actively being recruited into trafficking.
If there's a plea that you have for whoever's going to decide whether or not you guys can get back on the streets, what is it?
We have a cadre of retired agents who are willing and anxious to get involved. They all have the same question: what would be my authority? What would be my liability? And once those issues are covered, I think we can do a lot of good and prevent a lot of tragedy.
The former agents don't just want to volunteer their time in Ohio, they want to expose the link between our nation's missing children and their vulnerability to sex trafficking.
We're looking at something we can translate potentially to other cities across the country.
And with an estimated 100,000 trafficked children in the U.S. every year, fighting the problem could make Raccia and Radcliffe the hardest working retired agents out there. Reporting in Toledo, Jacqueline Policastro, 13 ABC, Action News. Dinner at the Radcliffe residence in Perrysburg, Ohio. Families, former partners, coming together.
There are 1,000 kids each year, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, that end up being trafficked.
The dinner discussion is serious. These former special agents are still fighting red tape as they try to volunteer their time to help find missing children before they get absorbed into sex trafficking.
We still have the desire to help people. That might sound trite and corny, but it's the kind of thing that we did all our careers. And you don't lose that fervor.
Bill Raccia and Bill Radcliffe spent 15 years working together as FBI agents in Toledo. They say they're just trying to fill a void, telling me they don't think there are enough specially trained officers to look for missing children in Toledo. The Toledo Police Department only has one missing persons detective for both adult and child cases.
In a place like Toledo, Ohio, if these runaways aren't located within 2 weeks, there's an excellent chance they'll be absorbed into human trafficking.
Raccia and Radcliffe have unsuccessfully asked for credentials and liability insurance from the Toledo Police Department, Lucas County Sheriff's Office, Toledo FBI Office, Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The former agents tell me they don't want their fight to get involved to end here. They're hoping other former agents throughout the country will get on board too.
We have thousands of agents who are most anxious and willing to give over their time. And I think people have to know that we're not trying for a second career. Nobody wants to make a lot of money. Our only request is that we have the authority and some liability coverage, and that's it.
They aren't the only ones making the request. Senator Rob Portman is trying to help out too.
They're well informed. They're focused on, taking their retirement and, doing something constructive, which is to help find some of these missing kids. And I think they can play an important role.
For now, the men are frustrated. They have skills developed over a career. They have the desire to help people. But even after pushing for nearly 3 years, they still have to wait. Reporting in Perrysburg, I'm Jacqueline Policastro.
Senator, we know that in Ohio there's a shocking statistic. More than 1,000 children are involved in sex trafficking every single year. Now we've learned that many of those children were children who were reported missing. You're working on legislation to try to track those missing children.
The idea is to collect more data about this so law enforcement can find out who these kids are who are missing and therefore getting exploited, and to provide, better information to child welfare agencies.
Senator, we know that many of these children, most of them, are coming from the child welfare system. Do you think there's a larger problem there?
I think there's a need to look at this in a deeper way. The federal government has a role here, by the way, because there is federal funding through the Social Security Administration for child welfare that the states take advantage of. So we have the opportunity here to help make these child welfare agencies work better, to identify these kids, get them the services that they need.
On this issue, we know what we don't know. We know we don't have enough data. What's happening to try to change that?
Legislation that we have does provide the states with the incentive to collect this data and then to have that data be known nationally and to have a better way to find these kids, identify these kids. There's lots of interest in this in Ohio. The law enforcement community is excited about the legislation. They want the data. They want to be able to track down these kids.
About this time last year, you started the Senate caucus to end human trafficking. And there are certainly a lot of issues that you could be a champion for up here on Capitol Hill. Do you think that this is one that you're confident you can make a change, not just in Toledo, but maybe throughout the country?
I believe so, even the world. We've already made some changes in law that relate more to this international issue of human trafficking. Now we're beginning to focus more on the United States, and specifically the issue of young kids and sex trafficking.
Bring back our girls. This message is spreading throughout the world and through the halls of Congress, where lawmakers say sex trafficking needs to stop. This chilling video is drawing a response from Washington.
Every day when I wake up, and I think about young girls in Nigeria.
From Hollywood and the online world, hashtag bring back our girls. It's not just a mission aimed at what's happening abroad. The horror of the Nigerian kidnappings has placed even more focus on those who force young girls here at home into sex slavery. There are an estimated 100,000 trafficked children in the U.S. every year. The largest group of trafficking victims are our girls, domestic youth.
Something that definitely happens abroad, but it's also happening here in our own backyards.
Olivia Burns is part of a human trafficking coalition. She's lobbying members of Congress, trying to raise awareness about domestic sex trafficking.
We're rescuing victims, and we're, really making a lot of headway. The more awareness that we can get and people talking about the issue.
As support mounts across the globe and here inside the Capitol, Senator Rob Portman is hoping to get more attention for the legislation he's pushing in Congress.
Horrible for those Nigerian families and those girls, but it has raised the visibility of the issue. More and more of my colleagues are talking about it. I do think the American people are now understanding this is a real issue. And by the way, not just in Nigeria or the Philippines or other places, it's a real issue in our country.
Portman's bill is aimed at better protecting missing children so they don't get involved in trafficking. If passed, the bill would require law enforcement to update missing children records, coordinate with child welfare systems, and allow state missing persons units to update information to a missing child entry in the National Crime Information Center.
We started a caucus to deal with human trafficking and sex trafficking. This is unfortunately a vivid example of why it's so important.
Let us bow our heads for a moment of silence.
So the outcry over the unthinkable is felt in Washington, and with every day that passes, it's bringing more lawmakers to this sentiment.
I'm hopeful that this horrific example in Nigeria continues to raise the awareness and that we begin to take some steps.
Senator Portman tells me he'll continue to push for more awareness and tougher laws to help keep our girls safe here in the United States and around the world. Reporting on Capitol Hill, I'm Jacqueline Policastro. She goes by the nickname T, and lawmakers are calling her one of the most courageous congressional witnesses they've ever met.
I became vulnerable for a man to basically sexually exploit me. He lured me first on the streets, then the internet, and primarily anywhere he could.
Withelma Ortiz Walker Pettigrew is using her story to help lawmakers better understand the issue of sex trafficking in our nation. In her testimony to the House Judiciary Committee,
We need to extend these services.
she said she spent her life on the streets from when she was 10 to 17 years old, beaten, tortured, manipulated, and sold for sex.
I am coming with the knowledge of not only my own experience, but plenty of other young people who've been victimized for sexual exploitation.
T told lawmakers she thinks people who purchase children for sex should be prosecuted as child rapists. She advocates for better services for victims and says the child welfare system is partly to blame. She was raised in the system.
I don't think that there's enough supervision upon the funding that's given to serve and provide for the young people, and so it's often, manipulated or taken advantage of by caregivers.
Right now, members of Congress tell us human trafficking in the U.S. is a $9.8 billion industry. One lawmaker on the committee is working on legislation to increase penalties for trafficking offenses, strengthen reporting of the crime, and set up a domestic trafficking victims fund inside the Treasury Department.
They prosecute the trafficker. Let's go after the customer, because it's all about money. Treat those individuals like criminals and make sure that they go to prison, and make sure that the days of boys being boys is over.
Congressman Ted Poe is doing more than just write legislation. He's encouraging T to continue to tell her story, saying he believes it will help convince other lawmakers that something needs to be done now.
I definitely wouldn't be here today if I didn't feel that this was possible to make a difference in women like me or other young people.
Reporting in Washington, Jacqueline Policastro, 13 ABC.
Guys just approach left and right, and they're college guys, business guys. The creepy ones are the ones in the black, like sedans.
Andrea Powell is describing the men she says are buying sex from young girls. Powell is the head of Fair Girls, a D.C.-based nonprofit created to help sex trafficking victims.
It's modern-day slavery, and America has a bigger problem with that than it thinks it does.
It's a modest office, but a bright spot in what's become a dim world for thousands of children. Powell says most of the young girls she works with at Fairgirls were trafficked as soon as they left foster care.
Every child in that situation needs to have one loving, caring adult, and that person needs to follow them all the way through adulthood. Because what they're learning in the foster care system is that you're only as good as the check that comes with you. So they're already learning that they're a commodity.
Just a few miles away on Capitol Hill, Senator Rob Portman is legislation aimed at better protecting missing children so they don't get involved in trafficking.
It's an issue where I think there's an exciting opportunity here to change the dynamic, to help save some of these kids, and to help stop this horrific practice that we see throughout our state.
If passed, the bill would require law enforcement to update missing children records, coordinate with child welfare systems, and allow state missing persons units to update information to a missing child entry in the National Crime Information Center. Congressman Bob about sex trafficking too. He signed on to this letter asking Attorney General Eric Holder to shut down the online site Backpage.com, saying the site pulls in millions of dollars each year advertising children for sex services. Back at Fairgirls, Powell scrolls through Backpage.com.
This is a pimp.
And tells me there are between 10 and 20,000 sex ads on the website every day. And victims tell Powell they're forced to have sex with up to 10 men each night.
People, sex trafficking is about sex. It's not about sex, it's about money and power. And if traffickers could traffic pink elephants, they would, if that made more money. They're trafficking women and girls because there's a demand for bought sex in America that's epidemic level.
That demand takes victims across state lines, which makes locating missing children quickly a priority shared by lawmakers and victims advocates like Powell.
We've had girls who've shown up here in Washington, D.C. from Ohio as well as Iowa and Michigan and all over the country. They had no idea they're the nation's capital. And yet later when we drive them past, say, the White House, like, oh yeah, we saw that. They just really aren't aware of their surroundings at all. They're kids.
And at Fairgirls, those kids are rescued from a life of trafficking and given the chance to rebuild their lives. Reporting in Washington, Jacqueline Policastro, 13 ABC Action News.
Jacqueline, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. You attended a hearing this week, we understand, on Capitol Hill where lawmakers really grilled experts with questions about our country's sex trafficking problem. And as I said, across the country and very close to home here. What'd you find?
Yeah, well, Lee, I've told you about what the Senate's doing, but this is a new House measure. And I went to a hearing. There was a victim there, an FBI officer there, a police officer who deals with crimes against children, and also a judge. And something that they all had in common in their testimony is that they say that this is a growing problem in the U.S. Right now, we know that human trafficking is a $9.8 billion enterprise in the United States. And, you know, it's something that is really hard to track. There aren't a lot of statistics about right now. And so that's why there are so many different people coming together to try to bring their knowledge to lawmakers as they work on legislation to combat this.
Oh, that's a mind-boggling number, $9.8 billion. But this really comes down to victims. And I understand you talked to a victim after the hearing. What was her story, her advice?
Well, Lee, I talked to a victim. She goes by the name of T, and she has been at several hearings on Capitol Hill. And her story is a tough one. She was trafficked from when she was 10 years old until she was 17 years old. And she was inside the Child Welfare Service. And that's actually a point that a lot of different people are looking at right now who are studying sex trafficking, because statistics, the ones we have anyway, show that many of the youth who are being trafficked do come from the Child Welfare Service. You know, she had been in jail several different times, so her testimony was really very unique. Afterwards, several of the lawmakers came up to her to commend her for the work that she's doing to try to speak out on behalf of victims.
This seems like an age-old question. We as a society prosecute the victims and the pimps, but not the Johns, the people who actually buy the sex. What's the response to that? I'm sure that was brought up.
It was brought up several times, especially from lawmakers. T mentioned it as well, though. She said in her experience that, you know, she was brought to jail, that the pimps who were working with her, if you will, were brought to jail as well. But how come the men who are buying sex aren't prosecuted? It's a question that I've asked several attorney generals in the past, and it's one that I really haven't ever gotten a straight answer to. The answer has been that's just how we've done things. And it's something that I think lawmakers are finally realizing needs to happen in order to curb this problem.
How's this playing out on the internet? We have heard so much about how this is the place where this crime often begins. What are lawmakers doing about that?
Yeah, Leah, it is often the place where this crime begins. Several different lawmakers have signed on to a letter to Attorney General Eric Holder asking him to shut down that website, Backpage.com. It's one of the worst, but many of the FBI agents that I talked to say that there are more than 100 other websites similar to Backpage.com that they've found in the past several years. And the thing that's tricky about this is law enforcement, they use these sites as a way to sort of find and help some of the child victims, but they also need to stop the sites from existing because it's just making the crime easier to commit.
All right, our Washington Bureau Chief Jacqueline Policastro following up on her series Sex Trafficking Exposed.